Hello and welcome once again to the bike show, which is coming to you from Bavaria, and the reason for that is I've been riding a new naked bike. But before we get to that, let me just tell you that if you hang around for this episode, later on we'll be speaking to a racing legend, a young racing legend from South Africa, who is an absolute master of extreme enduro, and we'll be catching up with Fired Up Motorcycles and their latest online developments. Now, first of all, the new bike. Let's not beat around the bush. It's BMW's F900R. It's a new naked bike in a year of naked bikes, in a year of naked bikes that have been dominated by super nakeds, really hardcore sports naked bikes like V4 Ducati Street Fighters, like Super Ducars, like supercharged Kawasaki's. But we mustn't forget that the naked class of bikes is really dominated, at least in terms of sales, by a certain more all-rounder type of class, more affordable class certainly. And these are the middleweight naked bikes, which aren't quite so hardcore focused in terms of sport riding, at least most of them. And the F900 fits right in there. Now, you may remember that a couple of episodes ago, a month or so ago, I tested the F900XR. Now, that is the first time that the S1000XR, a bike I absolutely love, which has done very well for BMW, has gained itself a stablemate. So they've made the F900XR, which is a kind of sport tourer, and I absolutely raved about that bike. But now we've got the F900R, surely I'm going to rave about this as well. Well, no, not really. To make the job easier, perhaps I should compare it against the bike it replaces, which is the F800R. Now, that thing had been around for ages and, to be honest, was selling long after it probably should have done. The engine, let's start there, because obviously it's grown in capacity. It's actually 895 cc's, and it remains a parallel twin, although basically an entirely new parallel twin, which has got a different firing order, not only to the 850, but obviously to the 800 that the naked 800R actually was in the past. We're looking at a bump in horsepower up to around 105 horsepower, although peak torque remains the same, 77 newton meters. In terms of character, though, that's where the big difference is. There's a change in firing order, which means that the new one feels much more sort of V-twinish and sounds a lot more entertaining as well. There's a new frame, obviously, that has done more to the riding position really in terms of what the rider can feel. So the F900R now has, compared to the bike it replaces, a more aggressive sporting position, although compared to something like an 890R or Triumph's 765 RS, it's not that sporty, don't get me wrong, but its foot pegs are a bit higher and further back than they were on the 800, and the handlebars a bit lower, so you're lent a little bit more over the front end. It feels good, but it's by no means uncomfortable, and it's by no means too extreme. In terms of suspension, well, I rode a bike that had, as is often the case from BMW, you pick one up from Munich and it's got everything on it. Understandably, they want you to try everything in the best version of the bike. So I had all the extra packs thrown on it. It had the semi-active suspension, which is only at the rear, by the way. The front, no matter which level of extras you opt for, is an unadjustable front fork, which I would say for 99% of people, for 99% of riding is absolutely ample. I certainly never felt like I needed any more control over the front end. The adaptive suspension on the rear and the fact that you can control it electronically and dial in a bit more preload and that sort of thing if you're carrying a passenger or a load of luggage, that's really, really useful. The handling itself it's good. Compared to the sportier bikes that are around, middleweight naked, we're talking, remember, it's not as nimble, it's not as agile, but it is not slow in the way it turns, and it is very reassuringly stable at all times, even when you start going a little bit bananas, so that's good. Which means, yes, as an experienced rider, you can enjoy the ride, but also as a novice rider, you'll be able to get a lot out of the bike without feeling overwhelmed at all. In terms of electronics, then this is one area that the BMWs as a rule in the middleweight class, and certainly the F900R, they've got the opposition absolutely whooped. There's no other way of putting it. The colour TFT dash on the 900R is brilliant. It's the best in class. You can control it by, we're all familiar with it now, the control wheel on the left-hand handlebar, which is just a brilliant system as well. If you've got the very basic one in other parts of the world, then you get road and rain riding modes, which do have a difference to them, but with the top spec you get Dynamic and Dynamic Pro, which is where the lean angle sensitivity comes in. There's a quick shifter up and down, which, like most of the systems these days from all the manufacturers, lower gears, lower RPM, it's not that smooth. You tend to ride it more manually, but at higher revs, really lovely to use. The BMW also knocks the opposition into a cocked hat with things like cruise control, heated grips. It's got a cornering headlight as well, the F900R, which is very useful. Extra dimension for safety, and there's an anti-theft system on there as well, which is nice to know that you've got it parked outside. It's a little bit more difficult for your average thief to take it away. The only thing I would say perhaps is that the fuel tank's a touch on the small side. I mentioned this with the XR, and well, with the R it's actually even smaller. It's 13 litres, so I mean, you're going to struggle if you ride with a bit of a heavy right wrist. You're going to struggle to see 200 k's or so. You're certainly not going to extend the range beyond that because you're just going to get nervous about running out of fuel. I have to say though, having ridden it and enjoyed it, don't get me wrong, it is a good bike. It's just that I feel the XR, I would take the XR every single time. The riding position is more friendly, it covers distance better, it's got a useful screen. So in terms of the bike that it replaces, the 800R, massive improvement. In terms of its sibling, like I said, I'd take the XR, and in terms of its competition, let's cross over to our South African correspondent, my right hand man, my mate, my rotund, rapid colleague Don, and find out what he thinks. So Don, as you can see, I really struggled with this F900R. You may remember a couple of weeks ago I reviewed the XR, and I really loved that. I love the combination of engine and chassis and riding position and practicality and electronics, all those usual BMW traits. And yet, somehow I don't feel the same way about this R, and I think it's got to do with the fact that its competition is just so strong. Now, I know you went on the South African launch. What did you reckon?
Okay, three specific things stood out about that bike. Number one, the 900 motor is infinitely better than the 850 motor. That was infinitely better than the 800 motor, if you remember that. So you compare it to its predecessors, that motor is way better, way more interesting, way more fun, way more character, everything like that. So that's good. It's very small, that F900R. So it's one of these sort of bikes, especially as a town bike, it's one of these sort of bikes anybody could ride and flick it around and be confident on. That's good. BMW can't do a gearbox on a twin though. Now pull off and go, whoop. You know, it's got a quick shifter, so you just leave the throttle open and push up on the lever. Leave the throttle open, push up on the lever, gah! You know what I mean? And flipping and helmets start bouncing around. What the hell was that? And you just kind of think, especially you look like KTM 790 and all of them have such smooth, silky gearboxes. Why doesn't this have one? Come on, BMW.
Yes, it's true. I must admit, when I was riding it, and this applies to the XR really as well, at sort of mid RPM and below, you just end up riding it like we always used to, with a bit of clutch and a bit of a blip of the throttle on a down change. In its defence, like a lot of them, it does work at higher RPM, but that's the thing with this 900R. It's one of these kind of soft, nice, cuddly type of naked bikes. In a year of naked bikes, we've become accustomed now to the super nakeds in the bigger category where everything is really hardcore and sporty. Well, in the middleweight category, which this capacity has now become, there are some seriously sporty bikes, and the F900R's price puts it in with them in a way. So in South Africa we're looking at nearly 297,000 Rand, which 7,000 Rand more than KTM's 890R. I'm sorry, but it ain't even a competition. It's down a dozen horsepower or more. MV Augustus Brutali sort of comes within range as well. Super sporty bike. And Triumph's 765 RS also. Now, I don't care who and where you're from. Those bikes are going to make you spend the money on them if you're comparing them to the BMW. The BMW should be compared against the other soft and cuddly middleweights, of which there are many. Don, I mean, the most obvious one, you tested most recently, the updated Kawasaki Z900. I rode the previous one, brilliant engine. Even if there wasn't a new one, I'd choose the Z900. I mean, what are your feelings on that?
Yeah, the Z900, I said, was very surprised because it's a four-cylinder, an inline-four with a screamer motor, screaming firing order. And for, you know, those used to be really boring. You know, you want the new cross-plane this and V this, and I really loved that motorcycle, that Z900. It just, it sort of brings fire to this, this, you say soft and cuddly class. It sort of brings a bit of fire to it. So it has all the soft and cuddliness. It's small. You can ride it around. It's not overly expensive. In fact, it's very rather well priced. And yet you can still open the throttle and have a good chuckle at the same time, which many of the others not quite as much. You got the MT-09, however. I mean, that's more. I mean, the Z900 is more the straight line hooligan bike. The MT-09 is more the kind of genuine hooligan front wheel giggle, that kind of motorcycle. You know what I mean? I think you would prefer the MT-09.
I would prefer the MT-09, to be honest. Yeah, it's almost a legend of an engine. The triple in there also makes, sort of knocking on a dozen more horsepower, and is also priced more reasonably. The MT-09 is 27,000 Rand cheaper than the BMW. The Z900, by the way, is 156,000 Rand. It's the cheapest bike in this class, so wow, I mean, you're looking at a bargain there. There are other bikes in here. It comes in range of at 190,000 Rand, so still 7,000 Rand cheaper than the BMW's Ducati's Monster 821, which has got, well, not that much going for it other than the big Ducati badge on the tank. Lovely bike, but also struggling in this competition, I think. And then, of course, the most modern additions to this class are KTM's 790 Duke and the 890. Let's leave the 890 alone. The 790 is a more natural competitor, and I gotta be honest, I feel like I'm hammering the BMW unnecessarily here, but I think in South Africa its pricing is compromised by the fact that BMW South Africa tends to bring in the fully spec'd, electronically, everything added to the bike. If you bought the base model here in Germany, where I am at the moment, the pricing would be absolutely identical basically to all its competition. But in South Africa, wow, they load it down and that's reflected in the price. And I think that's going to handicap it because, I mean, Don, you remember the 790 Duke? Great little bike, isn't it? At 160,000 Rand, so nearly 40,000 Rand more affordable.
Yeah. And here's KTM kind of the whole ready to, I mean, as you say, cute and cuddly class, but also ready to race. We took it around Kyalami at night time, if you remember that. And it was good fun. It's got launch control and all kinds of fun stuff. I'm going to actually I'm going to defend the BMW slightly. Yes, it's very highly priced. It's got a lot of electronics. There is also one other thing going for it, and that's the old badge thing. The BMW badge on the tank. Now, keep in mind, it's 195,000 Rand. I mean, you keep one for 3 years, put 20, 30,000 Rand on the clock, you'll probably sell it for 180,000 Rand, if you know what I mean. Just because that's what BMW do. They hold their price really, really well. Whereas the others, you're going to kind of go, okay.
I feel like I've been put in my place. I mean, what is happening to the bike show where Donovan is the voice of reason and he's telling me off for not paying attention to resale value and all these good things like that? Donovan, please stop embarrassing me.
Coronavirus. I'd already read the entire internet during the lockdown, so eventually I went on to boring stuff like economics and all that kind of stuff. How to be a grown-up.
I'm not sure I like it. I think we'd better return after the break, where he will be interviewing one of South Africa's latest racing heroes.